What would you do if a rat in a suit quietly built 120 luxury homes on land your late aunt left you? They thought they could outsmart the system. With high-end lawyers, shady loopholes, and forged papers, they saw me as a nobody. What they didn't know was that I'm a forensic accountant trained to catch snakes like them. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and tell me your city. When my flight touched down in Arizona, the heat felt like home. After 6 months consulting in rainy London, I was ready to reconnect with my roots. 50 acres of wild desert land left to me by my Aunt Margaret. The Uber driver chatted politely until we met the address. Then he slowed the car, frowning into the sun. "Sir, are you sure this is the place?" he asked. "This looks like a whole new neighborhood," I leaned forward. My chest tightened. Where I expected open land and dry brush, I saw rows of beige houses, identical boxes with polished lawns and brand new mailboxes. An ornate sign read Emerald Heights, a private community. I didn't even notice the driver pulling away. I just stood there, staring. My land, buried under manicured sidewalks and homeowner pride. I walked into the sales office like a ghost. Inside, it smelled like vanilla candles and fresh carpet. A young woman in heels and a tight blazer stood up, all smiles. "Welcome to Emerald Heights. Are you here to tour our Phase 2 models?" I pulled the deed from my bag, hands shaking. "I'm here to ask why there are houses on my land." Her smile flickered, but only for a second. "Oh, you must be Mr. Jordan. Melanie Ross, our HOA president, said you might come by." HOA? I'd barely even stepped off the plane. They didn't treat me like a landowner. They treated me like a problem, a technicality. She gave me directions to the HOA office, a sleek glass building overlooking a man-made pond. As I walked through the neighborhood that wasn't supposed to exist, I saw joggers, dog walkers, kids on scooters, all looking at me like I didn't belong. The truth was, they didn't belong, and soon they'd know it. Her smile flickered, but only for a second. "Oh, you must be Mr. Jordan. Melanie Ross, our HOA president, said you might come by." HOA? I'd barely even stepped off the plane. They didn't treat me like a landowner. They treated me like a problem, a technicality. She gave me directions to the HOA office, a sleek glass building overlooking a man-made pond. As I walked through the neighborhood that wasn't supposed to exist, I saw joggers, dog walkers, kids on scooters, all looking at me like I didn't belong. The truth was, they didn't belong, and soon they'd know it. The HOA building looked more like a tech startup than anything related to neighbors and fences. Glass walls, clean lines, chrome accents. But it wasn't the building that unsettled me. It was the woman waiting inside. Melanie Ross stood as I entered her office. She was everything you'd expect from someone used to getting her way. Early 50s, silver hair styled into perfection, and eyes that had measured people like me before I even walked in. Behind her, a law degree from Stanford hung crookedly, next to several civic awards arranged with surgical precision. "Brian," she purred, sliding a thick folder across her polished desk. "We've been expecting you." She said it like it was some kind of courtesy. I opened the folder, page after page of legal notices, certified mail slips, and official-looking forms, all sent to 1223 Maple Drive. "My aunt's house," I said slowly. "That place was torn down 2 years ago." Melanie's smile didn't flinch. "That was the address on file. We followed protocol." "You knew she'd passed away," her eyes gleamed. "We are not responsible for tracking down heirs. Your aunt signed the agreement. We acted legally." She leaned back, smug. "We'd be happy to offer compensation for your cooperation." That word, compensation, rang in my ears as I left. Like my land was just a scheduling error and not a legacy someone had trampled with manicured lawns. Back in my hotel, I did what I do best. I followed the money. Within hours, I found the first crack. Melanie Ross had once practiced law under the name Melanie Hutchinson before being disbarred in 2016 for conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, or misrepresentation. Her entire professional persona had been built on half-truths and backroom deals. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're back. If you want the real story about Emerald Heights, meet me at Java Junction, 10 a.m. tomorrow." a friend. I almost didn't go, but curiosity and something deeper, maybe loyalty to my aunt, pushed me there. Java Junction was the kind of cafe where you could tell the regulars by the way they held their mugs. I sat in a corner booth, black coffee in hand, scanning faces until she walked in. Young in a navy blue suit and tired, too tired for someone her age. She slid into the booth with a folder clutched to her chest. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Allison West. I used to work for Melanie." Her voice trembled, but her words were razor sharp. "She's not running a homeowners association. She's running a land scam." I listened as she laid it out. Melanie identified vulnerable properties, usually owned by the elderly or people who'd passed away with out-of-state heirs. She sent notices to known invalid addresses, waited for no response, then invoked obscure HOA clauses to claim abandonment. Once the HOA declared the land inactive, it was transferred quietly to development companies she secretly controlled. "She did it to 15 other family," Allison whispered. "Your aunt was different. She fought back." She handed me another file, handwritten letters, complaints filed with state regulators, even a private investigator's report. My aunt had been building a case and running out of time. "She knew Melanie wouldn't stop," Allison said. "That's why she changed her will, to leave the land to someone who could fight." I turned the page and saw a letter addressed to me. "Dear Brian, if you're reading this, then Melanie has made her move. I couldn't stop her, but you can. Look beneath the old oak tree by the creek. I left you everything you'll need. And trust Allison. She's one of the good ones. Love, Aunt Margaret." That night, under the cover of stars, Allison and I drove to what used to be the far edge of my aunt's property. The oak tree was gone, ripped out and replaced by a stone bench and a decorative fountain. But the roots had left behind disturbed earth, and the ground was softer than the rest. We dug in silence until the shovel hit metal. It was a waterproof lockbox. Inside, Margaret had left a stack of HOA original founding documents, secret recordings of Melanie's phone calls, her personal diary, detailed, relentless, heartbreaking, and one more thing, geological surveys from 1997. Allison's eyes widened. "This land sits on natural gas reserves." And just like that, the final piece clicked into place. Melanie hadn't just stolen land for houses. She was planning to sell the mineral rights for millions. I looked out over the development, 120 homes built on lies and buried gas, and whispered, "Let's build her a trap she can't escape." I'd built cases against corporate fraudsters before, men in suits who thought no one would notice missing zeros or shifting shell companies. But this was personal. They hadn't just messed with a spreadsheet. They desecrated my aunt's legacy, and now they'd given me a reason to fight. The next morning, Allison and I met with an old contact of mine, Special Agent David Chen of the FBI. I'd worked with him on a financial laundering case in Chicago years ago. When he saw the evidence we'd gathered, especially the HOA's forged paperwork and Melanie's offshore banking trails, he didn't even blink. "We've been tracking Harrison for a while," Chen said, referring to Melanie's developer partner, Jim the Hammer Harrison. "Money laundering, shady permits. But Melanie's always been one step ahead, until now. We had enough to raise serious red flags, but not enough to bring the whole operation down. We needed a confession, something undeniable, and we needed it fast. That's when I suggested we let her think she'd won. I would play the role of the overwhelmed heir, willing to settle for a payout. Allison, meanwhile, would go back to Melanie pretending she'd had a change of heart and was ready to help manage the Brian Jordan problem." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Risky, but if it works..." "It'll work," I said. "We just have to time it right." Melanie called for an emergency HOA meeting the following Thursday night. It would be held at the community center, a gleaming modern building funded no doubt by stolen land and siphoned HOA fees. The notice framed it as a discussion about resolving a property dispute with a disruptive heir. I showed up 5 minutes early, wearing khakis and a rumpled shirt, carrying a folder full of settlement paperwork, and carefully disguised recording equipment. The room buzzed with tension. Residents filled every seat, many whispering about me. Some looked angry, others just confused. Most of them, I knew, had no idea they were living in the middle of a criminal enterprise. Then Melanie walked in. Power suit, perfect smile, commanding presence. She strode to the podium like a senator facing a friendly audience. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As you've heard, Mr. Brian Jordan," she gestured to me without looking, "has made certain claims about land ownership that have complicated matters for our beautiful community." She paused for dramatic effect. "We sympathize with his situation, truly, but everything about Emerald Heights was done legally and in good faith." I stood up slowly, playing my part. "My aunt left me this land," I said, letting my voice tremble. "And now it's covered in homes. I don't want to displace families. I just want what's fair." Murmurs rippled across the crowd, sympathy mixed with skepticism. Melanie offered a placating smile. "And we're prepared to be more than fair. Mr. Jordan, we're offering you $200,000 for any residual claims. That's generous, considering the legal foundation of this development is sound." I nodded as if considering. "I suppose I just want closure." Then I reached into my folder and pulled out a small speaker. "Before I decide," I said, "I think everyone should hear something." I hit play. Melanie's voice filled the room, recorded the day before by Allison during their staged reunion lunch. "Of course I knew the old bat was dead. That's why we sent the notices there. Brian Jordan was sipping tea in London. By the time he figured it out, we'd have everything locked down." The silence shattered. People stood. Some gasped. Others shouted. What did she say? Did she just admit she knew? "My house is on stolen land?" Melanie froze, her composure cracking. "That's taken out of context," she snapped. But I wasn't done. I stepped forward and held up another document. "These are the real environmental reports," I said. "They show contamination levels on this land 3 times over the legal limit. You built homes here without proper remediation, and you hid that from every family in this room." The atmosphere erupted. People stood, yelling questions. A man in a construction vest shouted, "My wife's been sick since we moved in." Jim Harrison, seated near the front, made a move for the exit. But Connell Lewis, my old neighbor and now Emerald Heights resident, stepped into his path. "Not tonight, Jim," Connell said, arms crossed. Melanie looked around, desperate. "This is defamation," she screamed. "I'll sue every last one of you." But even she could see it. She'd lost the room. I turned back to the crowd. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stop the people who did." That night, FBI agents raided Melanie's office. The documents she'd failed to shred, the offshore records she'd hoped to hide. It all began unraveling. And still, I knew this was only the beginning. She'd built an empire on lies. Now it was time to take every brick of it down. The federal courthouse smelled like tension and old paper. It was standing room only. News crews, law students, former HOA victims from across the state. Emerald Heights residents packed the pews, some still in disbelief that their peaceful suburb had turned into ground zero for a criminal empire. And there she was, Melanie Ross. No longer the confident, calculating queen of the cul-de-sac. Today her designer suit fit looser, her makeup heavier, as if trying to hide how close she was to breaking. Sitting beside her was Richard Blackstone, Arizona's most feared real estate litigator. They called him the Shark, a man who hadn't lost a property fraud case in 15 years. His $3,000 suit was as sharp as his smile, and I was the accountant standing in their way. The prosecutor began by walking the jury through the charges: fraud, racketeering, environmental violations, conspiracy. Then came the documents: HOA fund transfers to shell companies, emails ordering forged signatures, soil reports buried deeper than the truth. But it wasn't enough. I had to make the jury feel the theft, smell the rot under the manicured lawns. So I took the stand. Blackstone rose smoothly, flipping open his leather-bound folder. "Mr. Jordan," he began, "you claim moral outrage. But isn't it true you wore a wire, manipulated conversations, and set a trap?" "Sounds like entrapment." "No," I said calmly. "Entrapment is tricking someone into committing a crime. I just gave Melanie the space to be herself, with a microphone nearby." Scattered chuckles. The judge didn't smile. Blackstone pressed harder. "You orchestrated a performance. You played the grieving nephew, the innocent heir, but you're a trained forensic accountant. You don't just investigate, you calculate. I met his eyes. You're right. I calculated that letting 120 stolen homes stand would be a worse injustice than bending a few rules to reveal the truth, he sneered. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity to enrich yourself. No, I said, but your client did, and she bulldozed an oak tree to do it. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we'd like Mr. Jordan to present his legal argument regarding ownership. I rose and held up a weathered book. Whitmore v. Henderson, Arizona Supreme Court, 1896, I began, ruled that structures built without consent on private land become the rightful property of the landowner. Reaffirmed in 1952, again in 1998, and most recently, last year in Peterson versus Maricopa County. Melanie's hands tightened on the table edge. These homes built on stolen ground belong to me, I said. Not because I want them, because the law says they do. Blackstone shot up. Objection. This is ancient law, not applicable to modern developments. From the back of the courtroom, a man stood and shouted, "This is a setup. That land belongs to Excelsior Energy." Security rushed toward him, but not before he tossed a folder onto the courtroom floor. Dozens of pages scattered. Maps, mineral contracts, a wire transfer sheet with Melanie's name. The judge slammed her gavel. Order, remove that man immediately. As guards dragged him out, Melanie's face turned a shade paler. I bent and picked up the top sheet. It was a preliminary lease agreement, unsigned, but detailing a $50 million payout for natural gas rights under Emerald Heights. I looked at Melanie. You weren't just stealing land, I said. You were drilling into a fortune. Judge Carter's voice cut through the tension. We'll take a short recess. Mr. Jordan, bring that document to my chambers. 10 minutes later, the courtroom reconvened. Melanie's legal team whispered frantically, but it was too late. The judge looked at me. Mr. Jordan, please continue. I turned to the jury. This was never about houses. It was about hiding theft beneath beige stucco. My aunt knew it. That's why she left me everything, because she trusted I'd follow the paper trail when no one else would. The final blow came when Allison West took the stand. She walked the court through Melanie's intimidation tactics, her connections with corrupt city officials, and the moment Jim Harrison confessed on tape to handling people like Brian before. She played the recording. The words echoed like gunshots in a canyon. The senator will make it go away. He always does. But this time he wouldn't, because the FBI had already raided his office that morning. As the courtroom sat in stunned silence, Judge Carter delivered her ruling. Based on overwhelming evidence of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy, this court recognizes Brian Jordan as the rightful owner of the properties built on his land. Additionally, pending environmental remediation, I support his restitution framework for current residents. Melanie screamed, "You can't do this!" "You did this to yourself," I said softly. As guards escorted her from the courtroom, the media swarmed. The headlines wrote themselves. HOA president's greed triggers landmark legal collapse. Forensic accountant turns HOA empire into rubble. And somewhere in the back of that courtroom, I swear, I felt Aunt Margaret smiling. 3 months had passed since the courtroom erupted in truth. Melanie Ross was now inmate number 48,390-AR, sentenced to 25 years without parole. Her empire of deceit collapsed like the facade it was. Jim Harrison turned state's witness and sang like a bird to the FBI. His cooperation helped recover over $30 million in stolen funds and triggered investigations in 3 other states. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Justice is a strange thing. It doesn't come with fanfare or fireworks. It comes in paperwork, in repairs, in hard conversations with neighbors who once saw me as the enemy. I stayed in Emerald Heights, not because I had to, but because I needed to finish what Aunt Margaret started. First, I met with every homeowner face to face. I explained the settlement. They could buy back their homes at original price. No shady fees, no hidden costs. Every dollar from the resales would go into a fund for environmental cleanup, legal support, and rebuilding trust. 90% agreed immediately. The rest followed within weeks. The contaminated areas were fenced off. We worked with the EPA, cleaned the soil, and planted wildflowers over the old HOA building. I kept one bench there, under the sun, for Aunt Margaret. We called it Margaret's Meadow. Allison West, the young lawyer who risked everything, opened her own legal practice specializing in HOA reform. She now had offices in 3 states and a client waiting list that stretched 6 months. This community gave me my career back, she told me once. Your aunt gave me my compass. Connell Lewis, my childhood friend turned accidental activist, was elected the new community president. His first act? Rewriting the HOA bylaws from scratch, with one golden rule: transparency above all. The neighborhood changed. Gone were the plastic smiles and passive-aggressive notes. In their place, real conversations, weekend barbecues, parents helping parents. We started a community garden where Melanie's marble fountain once stood, and somehow through it all, people healed. One evening I stood at the edge of Margaret's Meadow as the sun dipped low. Children played where lawyers once argued. Laughter echoed in the breeze. Connell walked up beside me, handed me a cold beer. You know, he said, when you first came back, most of us thought you were just here for revenge. I smiled. Maybe I was. But this place gave me something better. He looked around. It gave all of us something better. I nodded slowly. Sometimes the best revenge is rebuilding something they can't destroy. That night I posted a message to the HOA forum, the same one Melanie used to issue threats and fines. If you're watching this from a place where you feel powerless, don't give up. Document everything. Speak up. You are not alone. Justice isn't always fast, but when it arrives, it stays. Stronger than greed. Louder than silence. The next morning, that post had over 200,000 shares. Turns out, people everywhere were waiting for a story like ours. And maybe that's the point. Not that we won, but that we stood up. That we chose truth over comfort. That one woman's faith in her nephew and in a forgotten patch of wildflowers grew into something no crooked system could ever uproot. Because sometimes the most powerful traps are built not from anger, but from hope. If this story stayed with you, if it stirred something deep or made you see the world a little differently, then don't just scroll away. This wasn't just a tale of land, lawsuits, or a corrupt HOA. It was a story about everyday people who refused to be silent, about a man who used truth, law, and quiet determination to stand against greed and win. These are the kinds of emotional stories that remind us what really matters: community, integrity, and courage. We share stories like this, real narrated stories of betrayal, redemption, and justice, not just to entertain, but to connect, to show that in every neighborhood, behind every front door, there are struggles, small victories, and truths that need to be told. Brian's journey was personal, but the fight? That's something many face, against broken systems, predatory power, and silence. His story joins thousands of unraveled fates where one person's stand becomes a spark for many. So if you've ever felt powerless, overlooked, or underestimated, know this: you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that the good guys still win. And if you want more true stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you, hit subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen, remember, and pass it on.